Before we begin, please be advised that this show may contain some adult themes and language that may not be suitable for all listeners. Now, onto our show. Welcome to the Sippin Saga Society, where we cover histories, mysteries, and overall weird-ass shit. As always, we have Nevada and Christina with us, and I am Karina, your fearless leader. So,
Hi, leader.
hi. Wait, Christina, show us your beverage.
My first beverage is strawberry milk
That
that I
is
got
so
from the
pretty.
That's so cute.
Asian market.
Can you send that to me, please? I need that.
That looks so good.
That's Mondays. That's real cute.
Yeah,
Real
I
cute.
sent it to you. It says berry goodness
Does
on
it say sangria at the top?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
But it's strawberry milk and it's really good. It's from Japan.
it's so freaking. No wonder it's precious. That's why it's cute.
Yeah, very
Okay.
kawaii.
Oh, it is. Nev.
This is just from Natural Grocers, but it's wild tonic. It's a sparkling gin, raspberry, and goji rose. It's kombucha made with honey instead of sugar. And
Oh,
I got it also because it's pretty in a glass bottle with
I was
bees.
gonna say that bottle is so pretty.
I
But
really
also
like that art.
it has
I do
like
too.
desert mountains. So I was like, that's kind of on par.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a type of mountain. So my beverage for today, what my plan was to do this beverage called an avalanche. So it is like it's coffee cream liqueur and crown and and basically that's it, I'm pretty sure. There's something else in there. But I I didn't want to buy a bunch of
Stop.
crown. So I
Stop.
did a white Russian.
Oh, I thought that was going to be a Coors.
I wish you think I would drink the Coors. We already did that one. But yeah, so it basically what the avalanche is a white Russian, but instead of vodka, you're doing crown.
I love
So
that.
I'm curious about this one. I have never tried. I've never had a white Russian.
Me either. This is really
Find out.
sweet and so good, just so you know. Buy one. If you like kombucha,
Oh, this is delicious. This is really
Everyone's
good.
enjoying their drink. I
Good
love it.
for It's really good, guys. Like it's real. Like the alcohol is. It's a pre-mixed cocktail by, sorry, Cutwater, and it's really good.
Like it's dangerous.
Like you taste the alcohol, it's definitely there, but it's like definitely sippable. Like it's super sweet. It's coffee liqueur. It's coffee liqueur and vodka. It's pretty good. So today we're starting our second part of our Andes Mountain Crash series. We will still be using for the remainder of this series the book Miracle in the Andes by Nando Perrado. Once again, I chose this book because it was a firsthand account of the events, and I wanted to keep that personal touch to it. And I really love the book. Honestly, this is my second time reading it when I did the notes for this, and I loved it. And I feel like the second time hit even harder than the first time. So when we left the people of the mountains, they had crashed in the middle of the Andes, and they had to use their brains and innovation in order to survive. And so throughout that time, some leaders rose among them. They experienced some losses and challenges, with Nando losing both his mother and his sister. They also had to make the decision when they ran out of food to eat their dead. And that's when we left, when they had just kind of figured out how they were going to survive in the mountain, basically. Yeah, I know. Have your face is like, this sucks.
Aren't we only on like day 11 too?
and there's
Yeah.
like
Everything.
72 days over.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Only 62 to go.
Woo. So one of the boys had found a radio in the wreckage, and although the reception was poor, His name is Roy, by the way. Roy
What's
had
his name?
created
Roy.
Roy
Okay.
is
Okay.
the boy that
Roy
he
boy.
Roy boy. He created an antenna out of electrical wires. And so every morning, him and the other boy that was like one of the leaders, Marcelo, would walk out and attempt to hear the news. So like they would walk, they had found a spot where like they could get good or decent-ish reception. Also, please remember this happens in 1972. It's not like today where there's like freaking antennas and satellites everywhere. You get radio everywhere, like, and you're in the middle of the mountains. It's gonna be a lot harder to get radio reception. So on the 11th day, we're at the 11th day, Roy heard a voice coming through. And it said, after 10 days of searching without results, Chilean authorities have called off the search for the, oh, Christina, your face, for the Uruguayan charter flight that had disappeared over the Andes. There is no chance that anyone still survives.
No.
Yeah,
And they're just sitting there fucking waiting for them
to show up.
still.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope that's like some kind of determination because obviously, because Roy is very smart, right?
Mm-hmm.
For being able to use his resources or whatever to even do that, like to get that much. And so hopefully, like, I would hope that them hearing that is like, okay, like we gotta
We got to do something.
do something. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what happened.
Oh my gosh.
So they came back from where they go to hear the radio and they were like, well, they called off the search. And so all the boys responded differently. But Nando began to lose all hope and felt that his only chance of survival was to walk away, to walk from the wreckage and go find help himself. He said, this place is a graveyard and death touches everything here. But his friends reminded him that like him just leaving wasn't going to solve anything because he wasn't going to be prepared. He didn't know how long it was going to take him to reach help. And also, he needed to think about the group because, like, everybody helps, every person helps. You can't just leave all your friends and be like, fuck you guys, I gotta go, and then start walking and hope that you make it without any resources or help or anything. So he waited and he calmed down. But, the search was abandoned. They couldn't see anything else. That's all that they could think about. I mean, imagine like you're on the fucking side of the mountain, you think they're going to get help, and then suddenly nobody is coming. And that was the thought that had kept them, alive, honestly, because they were sitting there waiting. They were eating to wait for rescue. And so their leader, Marcelo, had lost all his hope. And so he just took a step back and was like, I don't want to lead these people anymore. He didn't want to live. And as the days went on, those who held off on eating the dead because they were like, I can't eat my friends or family and whatever, which respectfully, yes, I understand that. They started forcing themselves to eat. And they would tell themselves that they needed the life that the bodies provided. So they started to eat the meat. They ate enough to hold their starvation at bay. And eventually they began to eat the kidneys and livers and hearts because they didn't want to waste the bodies. So they ate as much as they could from them. They didn't know, I mean, didn't know how long they were going to be on the mountain. They would arrange the meat on small pieces of aluminum and let it dry out in the sun. And in the few moments that they would have fire, they would cook it in there. But out of respect, they never ate Nando's sister and mother. We were still hungry at all times and wasting away. That's what he says. Time was running out, and soon they would be too weak to do anything. But Nando was right, they did need to leave, but they also needed the plan. So their first goal was to climb up the mountain and to kind of figure out what terrain that they were up against. You don't know where you're going, you don't know what's going on. How do you plan an escape? So they agreed to send out a group to climb the mountain as well as search for the tail section of the plane because they remember they split in half or the plane had split up. So they were like, that's somewhere.
Mhm.
So they knew that there were potentially batteries in the back of the plane. And so they were like, maybe that will help us like get some, like we can, their hope was that they could fix the radio, like to call out and get help.
Oh,
Yeah.
smart.
So they were
Smart.
hoping they could get the batteries and bring them back to the cockpit and then be able to like radio out and get some assistance.
But climbing up the mountain, that provides a whole other like dangerous space of altitude sickness.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
I
I
mean,
didn't even think about that. Like the was it oxygen level and stuff. Like it's hard to
Yeah.
breathe.
it's so high. So, but they did agree to go leave in the morning and to go up and do a little exploration voyage to kind of figure out where they're at. So, I think it was like a group of four, and they all went and they were wearing lightweight moccasins on their feet with seat cushion snowshoes that one of the boys had invented. As
Ooh,
well,
smart.
so like, when you're walking on snow, it's like hard to not keep stomping through. So they were like, this will keep us on top
Mm-hmm.
because the cushions
They
were
are
wider.
Comfy.
smart.
Hmm. So they
They're
made,
trying their best. It
I
hurts my
know.
heart.
Oh, Christina,
They're
it's
doing
gonna
good.
get worse.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, they are
Thank you
doing
for the
really good.
optimism.
And they're so innovative. Like they
Yeah,
really had
yeah.
like that's what I'm saying. They had to be so creative and so like gotta think on your feet. Because I'm trying to think if I would have even thought of any of these.
It's
I like to
hard
I
when
like
You
to
you're in
might
a
hope.
have.
I like to
situation.
hope I would, but it's like it's crazy.
You never
So
know.
really, until I'm in this situation, nobody knows.
Because it is really easy to, I mean, like you said, like to give up,
Hmm.
to just be like, well, this is what it is. And
We're just gonna die here.
mm-hmm.
They also made sunglasses out of tinted sun visors they had found in the cockpit. So they just cut
So
out some
smart.
lenses. And although they were only wearing sweaters, like they still went out there, but they had hoped that they would make it back before sunset to avoid the cold. The cold. Because I mean at this point we still have the wreckage that they can hide in.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So but the guys that are going out and climbing, if they don't make it back before midnight or before nighttime and the sun goes down, it's gonna be freezing.
Mm-hmm.
So the others waited at the wreckage and they watched them climb and disappear. The boys spent the day, or like in the wreckage, they spent the day waiting, and when the night came, there was no sign of the boys that had out.
Oh, no.
They could feel the wind batter the fuselage and felt as snow was forced through the holes of the makeshift wall. They prayed for those out in the snow, but it was hard to stay hopeful. Which, like, yeah, like we are barely surviving inside our little shelter. Imagine being out on the side of a mountain and being like, well, hope we make it. When
That's
morning came,
crazy.
I know. They gathered outside and kept a lookout to see if their friends were making their way back. And by late morning, they began to see some movement in the horizon. Oh, my bad. It was three. Three black dots moving on the snow. At first, they worried that their brains were playing tricks on them, but eventually they could see them shuffling down. It was as if their friends had returned from the dead. They were battered and weak, but they were alive. And all three men had the resignation in their eyes similar to those of like old people. All their feet were nearly frozen, and Gustavo's eyes had been damaged since his glasses broke.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then they're on the side of a mountain, and you're that much closer to the sun, and also it's covered in snow,
It's bright.
blinding.
Mm-hmm.
They wrapped Gustavo's eyes with a shirt to protect them from the sun, and eventually they spoke of their ordeal. The mountain was steep and the air was thin. They had climbed all day and only reached halfway up the slope. They decided that they didn't want to come back with bad news, so they found shelter near a rocky outcrop where they made a short wall out of the stones and continued to climb in the morning. The cold in those slopes was indescribable. It rips the life from you, painful as fire, and I didn't think we would survive. They hadn't found the tail, but they did find the remains of those who had fallen out of the plane. So just like bodies.
Oh,
They had taken their watches, wallets, religious medallions, and other personal items from the bodies. The summit was too far even the next day, and they didn't have the strength to climb, so they made their way back. Because they just like went up there. They didn't bring any supplies. They just went out on a little trip. Nando asked Gustavo what he had seen out there. The peaks are too high and you can't really see far. I saw between two peaks something yellowish brown, but I really couldn't tell if I really was seeing it or if it was a rock. But one thing you should know that when I looked down at the crash site, the Fairchild was a tiny speck of snow, and you can't tell it from a rock or a shadow. So, like, they hear this news that nobody is out looking for them, and now he's like, yeah, you can't see anything. Well, it's a
yeah. Like
white
even if they
plane.
were looking, yeah, it would be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Nando was the one who began planning their mission to seek rescue, so he became the leader of the endeavor. He didn't feel like a leader, though. He was scared, confused, and had no desire to lead anyone. He was just trying to keep himself together. Nando began to plan what it would take to get off the mountain because the other option he had was to curl up and give up. He still had hope that he might stumble through the mountainside and make it home, and it was terrifying to think about leaving, and he knew he couldn't do it alone. So he began to measure up the boys to figure out who would be the best candidate to take with him on his journey for rescue. And he decided on Roberto, who was determined and strong-willed and who would stand up to the Andes just through sheer stubbornness, which I loved. I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna
We
be
all have one
angry and
friend like
stubborn.
that.
You guys both are that friend.
Just to prove a point.
All I'm hearing is we can go to the mountains together.
We would help make our friends survive, is what I hear.
Oh, you're
If
living.
Nev is gonna force me to try to eat my friends, then Nev will force me to go up that damn mountain or
You will
whatever.
survive.
You
I'm
will.
a survivor. I'm not gonna give up.
So when Nando pitched the idea to Roberto, he said, "You're crazy. Have you seen how tall the mountains are?
Stop it.
Imagine be like this bitch. I'm on the mountain with you. I can see them.
Do you not?
Anyway." And then they began preparations. So he's like, "You're crazy. We got to do this." They knew they were going to need food, water, and warm clothing. So how are we going to keep warm at night? We could build shelter underneath the rocks.
Obviously.
Well, what time is the best time to go? We can't wait too long to go. So they're just like making these plans. And then he looks at him and he goes, "It will kill you, you know." "It probably will," said Nando. "But if we stay here, we're as good as dead."
That's true. You're choosing death or death. At least you're trying to survive.
Exactly.
And the what if that you do make it.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's what if versus a certainty. I mean, eventually we're going to run out of food.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
We're going to run out of friends to eat. And that's I mean,
Also.
that's the reality. Like,
Because nobody's coming to look for him at this point, you know.
and they know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
God. And because before you heard that, you could have lived with the like hope that they were still looking for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
The plan was to seek help by the last week of October. One night after midnight, it was dark and cold when out of nowhere, Nando had a surge of joy so deep that for a moment the cold vanquished, and for the first time since the crash, he was certain he would survive. Just like one night, he just like had a dream, woke up and was like, "I'm gonna live." And he woke up and woke everybody else up and said, "I'm gonna save us." And everyone was like, "Okay, Nando." Like, Roberto did finally agree to go with him, accompanied by two other boys, Fito and Numa. And it was decided that these expeditionaries, that's what they called them, would receive more food, sleep in the warmest places, and be excused from chores to conserve energy. After 2 weeks on the mountain, they found a reason to hope. Because, like, they got a plan. On October 29th, they prepared to sleep. It was a windy night, and when Nando woke up, a huge, heavy force had thumped on his chest. Suddenly he was wet and realized that an avalanche had filled the whole fuselage with snow.
Oh my God.
He managed to breathe shallowly, but his nose and mouth were filled with snow, and he knew he was going to die. Suddenly, a hand clawed the snow from his face, and he heard his friend Carlitos say, "Give them air, give them air." And so they started digging. So everybody else had been digging to get the people out, and they were like, "Who's missing? Who do we need to search for?" And they're looking for Liliana. "Find her. We need to find her." And Nando looked around after they dug him out and saw Javier, Liliana's husband, holding Liliana in his arms, and he knew she was dead. They ended up losing Marcelo, Enrique, Coco, Daniel, Juan, Diego, and Liliana. They fell into a deeper despair after the avalanche. They had thought they were safe and were taught that the valuable lesson that these mountains were always dangerous. Death was around every corner. And why them and not me was all Nando could think. Which,
Oh, survivor guilt.
I mean, yeah, like,
Yeah.
and at this point, like, how many of your friends have died? Later that
That's
night,
heavy.
I know, this is the part that I was reading where I was like, can they not catch a break, please? They're already on this mountain. They finally have a reason to live, and you're like, and the mountain was like, "I'm gonna salt bathe this." No. Later that night, there was a second avalanche roaring down the slopes. But this time the snow rolled over them because they were already buried. So it just kind of went over them. The wreckage became unbearable after the avalanche. The snow was so deep they couldn't stand and had to crawl on hands and knees because the little tube of the wreckage was full. They stacked the dead at the rear of the plane where the snow was deepest, leaving only the clearing near the cockpit to sleep in. They were 19 left now. Everything they had was deep under a layer of snow. No makeshift blankets, no cushion. They had no idea how much snow was above them because they were covered by the avalanche. And he thought, now I know what it feels like to be in a submarine in the ocean because
Oh
you
my
don't know how deep
God.
you're in.
Yeah.
And for a moment, he wished they found him instead of Liliana. And I'm sure like it's exhausting. I would want to be done.
Yeah.
Right. The hours after were some of the darkest throughout the whole experience. Javier, Liliana's husband, wept miserably while everyone else mourned the loss of someone close to them. Helpless, vulnerable, and they could do nothing but sit there shivering. They began to wheeze and cough, and Nando realized that the fuselage was sealed by snow so tightly they were going to run out of oxygen. So he found an aluminum cargo pole in the snow and began driving it hard through the ceiling again and again until he punched a hole through the roof. He pushed the hole up, and the pole broke through the snow. And luckily, it turned out only to be a couple feet of snow above the wreckage. So they weren't like under like 30 feet of snow.
Oh, thank
And they,
God.
Okay, yeah.
and they were
Oh,
able to
thank
get
God.
some air. Yes. Nando removed the pipe and fresh air flowed in, and they breathed easier and finally slept for that night. When day finally arrived, they began to claw their way out through the cockpit. Their only means of escape was through remember how they had the door they could come in and
Mm.
out of? So now they're covered and they're surrounded by snow. So the only way they can get out is through the windows of the cockpit. But also there's a bunch of snow between them and the cockpit. So they have to shovel the snow out of the place. So there was
Oh,
only enough space for one person to work at a time. And they used metal shards and broken pieces of plastic and took 15-minute shifts. So they would just line up and then pass the snow to each other to like push it back
Oh my gosh.
so they could clear it out. Yeah, they finally made their way to the cockpit and managed the strength to push the window out. They discovered there was a blizzard. So they make it through the cockpit. They push the windows to get outside, and there's a blizzard.
gosh. Okay, catch a
And
break.
I'm
Fuck.
telling you,
That's crazy.
hmm yeah, the mountain is such a dangerous place. Like, not, I don't know, maybe because I've never thought about like mountain climbing as like a fun thing for me to do.
Oh, I like when I lived up in Alta, it was like that. We were in Inner Lodge a good up to 72 hours at a time because of the possibility of an avalanche because a random blizzard would come in. So I'm like, you weren't allowed to sleep in your like converted vehicles. You had to sleep in a real building or you'd get fined if you were caught in like a converted van out there because of the avalanche danger.
Oh my God, I'm sure it could just take you or
Yeah.
cover you and you're just trapped.
And it's so heavy.
Oh, I'm sure. And there's so much
That
of
when
it.
you were in Utah, Nick?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
when I was in
yeah.
Utah.
I remember seeing some of the pictures that you posted.
We were on
Ooh.
the news one time because the snow had covered the entire like restaurant area where I worked, and I had opened the door, and it was just like you couldn't have dug yourself out.
Terrible.
That's
It's
so scary.
it is horrifying to think. Like imagine you being under 20 feet of snow.
Yeah,
No, horrifying.
No, thank you.
Christina, I'm not going to do that.
No, thanks.
They used their time waiting for the blizzard to end discussing plans for escape. It was impossible to climb the mountains, so they would have to find a new way. And they agreed to wait until November 15th, the day that okay, so the way that they decided November 15th was one day somebody was in a taxi cab in Chile the last time they were there, and they had told them that on November 15th, that's when summertime starts in the Andes. So that's the day that they had decided to go. Because the cab guy said that that was the day spring started. My bad, not summer. They were like, that's the day that we should go. It's South America also. So spring is a different time for them.
Yeah.
They had to spend their time waiting, trapped in the wreckage under piles of snow, and they weren't able to melt water. So, from our previous episode, the way that they would melt water was to lay out aluminum and put snow on top, let it melt in the sun. So they're inside, but they still need to drink water. So they would just gnaw on chunks of snow that was
I
dirty
remember.
because they only had enough space, and I think I will bring it up later. Like they only had enough space to basically be either on your hands and knees, or when they were sitting, their hand like their head had to be tilted towards their chin
Oh, that's
because
uncomfortable.
they were like scrunched up because there was so much
Hmm.
snow in there with them. So like they were constantly crawling on the snow, but that's also the only snow you have to eat, the stuff you've been crawling on. And I'm sure if they had to pee, they just peed in there. Where else are you gonna pee?
Salt though. And you know what? There is a whole other thing though about how like drinking your urine could be good for you. So like
I'm
there's a
not going
doctor.
to do it. There's always a doctor.
I
There's
I
always
wonder if,
somebody.
well, no, maybe. I was gonna say, I wonder if they were just sitting there, like using the bathroom, or if they, you know what I'm saying?
Or if they got up and went into the corner or something.
And well, yeah, because like what I was thinking of is like maybe it was almost warm to them, but then I don't know if that's something that you'd want to do because it would
Because then it
Would
would
it
immediately almost
freeze.
freeze?
be, yeah,
Yeah.
Would you want to pee on yourself to stay warm or no?
No, because of the after
no,
effect of it freezing over, because then you'd
yeah.
be
Exactly.
even more cold. But I wonder if they like determined that one specific spot is where you go piss.
Right.
Yeah.
Did they say it? None of these things were answered in the book.
That's fair. That's the
Hmm.
least of the worries, is where you're peeing,
Yeah,
honestly.
I get that. So they didn't have any water and they also didn't have any frozen bodies because the bodies were outside, remember? So the only bodies that they had were the freshly dead people
Oh,
inside.
okay. I was gonna say the alive body is which.
No, because during the
Thank God.
avalanche, we had like 5 people die.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Hmm. So because everybody was frozen and outside, it gave them enough separation. So like the way they did it before was they had a group of like 4 people and those guys would be the only ones to go and cut the meat from the people outside and come back.
Yeah.
So they had the people that would process it essentially. And that gave them enough separation. That and on top of the fact that it was frozen, that the bodies were frozen. So it was like ice, hard ice essentially. So the only bodies that they had as a food source now were the freshly dead bodies that were in the wreckage with them. And so they had just died. They weren't frozen.
They're warm.
They were still
Maybe.
warm. I mean, they were still like fresh for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they waited 3 days before they did decide to eat them too.
That's sweet.
I mean, I think honestly they were like, we can get out of here and go find the other bodies, but wait for these friends to freeze a little more.
Imagine though, just sitting there with your dead friend that you had been talking to, not even probably 12 hours before that, just
This
like right
man's
next to you.
wife, his
Yeah,
wife, I
right there.
I could not, like, if that was my husband
No,
that was Christina sitting there, like if that was no.
no.
Well, and they had 4 kids together.
That's horrifying. Oh my
Hmm.
God.
Yeah. It was a horror to watch him slice a friend. When the flesh was handed to me, I was revolted. It was soft and greasy, streaked with blood and gristle, and I had to use all my willpower to swallow. And then once again, you have
Oh,
those
because
people
they
that,
couldn't cook it, could they?
no.
Oh my God.
And like before they would freeze it or like let it like tan in the sun and
Yeah,
kind of cook it.
yeah.
But no, they had no way of processing it. It was just like literally you eat this raw piece of meat
Because I
that
think
you
there's a
told
little
your
bit
friend.
of dissonance when you're able to like cook it. You know it's human, but you cook it and then it doesn't look any different than another
Like you're
piece of meat.
processing it, like you're
Yeah,
changing it
yeah,
versus like you literally just watched him claw, like rip it off of your friend.
yeah, exactly.
Where,
Wagyu, but
where
not.
before, exactly, where before they were outside, so they had to go outside and get them and come back in.
Wow.
Hmm. The blizzard finally ended, and it was warm enough that the guys were able to melt snow for drinking water from the roof of the wreckage. It took 8 days to clear the snow from inside the fuselage, using only flimsy plastic while passing the snow man to man until it was tossed outside. That's crazy. 8 days.
Okay, so now we're at 20, 21
It's
days.
it's November 1st. So we flew out the beginning of October.
Okay, so 30 days at least.
Mm-hmm. Or like 20 something, yeah.
Yeah. Damn.
Mm-hmm. So at least a month you're just there. The expeditionaries began to prepare for their trek. They made a sled using a hard shell suitcase and loaded it with all the gear that they could use, including blankets, seat cushion shoes, a bottle for melting snow into water, and other supplies. On an unrelated note, I think it'd be really funny to make seat cushion shoes. I think that'd be cool. Like slippers.
Oh, yeah.
Merch.
Like slippers?
That would be so cool. I'd be so fucked up. Okay, but it'd be cool. They created a backpack out of trousers and nylon straps, which they would use for gear and dried meat, which was like, wow, innovation. During the day, the temperatures were mild, as high as mid 40s, but the nights were still frigid. The biggest fear was that a blizzard would catch them mid voyage. So it's like that's why they had to wait too, because they didn't want to be out there in the middle of winter, like, okay, good luck. You have nothing, you have no shelter, it's just you and your
Just
jeans. One of the boys that was coming on the expedition was Coche. He was someone who had refused to eat meat when they had first started eating from the bodies of the dead. He was repulsed by the meat, but he was thin, and his legs had become septic, with large boils bulging. Eventually, Coche was too tired and too sick to be able to go, and ultimately he stayed at the wreckage. Many of the younger boys became weaker. Roy Harley was worse than Coche, and with his tall frame, because it had lost all its fat and muscle. He walked hunched, as if he was a collection of sticks held together by sagging skin. And like it's extra sad because they were athletes together. They were on the team together. You watch these people out there like best physical position
Mm-hmm.
or like and now they're falling apart, but out of no fault of their own.
skin and bones.
Mm-hmm. On the morning of the 15th, November 15th, they set off on the slopes. They made good progress down the slope, but after an hour, the temperatures began to drop and snow started to spiral around them. With every second counting, they stumbled back to the fuselage just as a blizzard overtook the mountainside. It was one of the worst blizzards in all their weeks on the mountain, and as they waited, Numa's leg became worse because someone had stepped on it the night before that they decided to leave, and the bruise had turned into a large sore, and they ended up having to leave him behind. The day was clear and calm when Nando, Roberto, and another boy named Tintin gathered their things and took off down the slopes. There was little talking, and Roberto was slightly ahead, pulling the sled when they saw him shout and point, because they had found the tail of the plane. They did find it.
Oh.
There were suitcases scattered, and the trio quickly tore through them, finding socks, sweaters, and pants. They also found rum, chocolates, cigarettes, and a camera with film. In the galley of the plane, they found meat pastries, which they quickly ate,
Oh my God. It's
snacks,
like Christmas.
mm-hmm, while saving the moldy sandwiches for later, because they found moldy sandwiches.
Ooh.
And they were like, food.
Mm-hmm.
They found batteries for the radio in the tail's exterior, then took wooden crates outside to use for a fire. They roasted meat and peeled the mold off the sandwiches and ate them. Roberto connected the batteries to a light fixture, and they lay down after sunset to read magazines and comic books. Nando took pictures of them with a camera, hoping that if they died, someone would find them and know that they had lived, even if it was only for a moment. They continued on their trip and took shelter under a rock outcrop for the next night of their journey. This was Nando's first night outside of the shelter for the night, and he had used the tail the night before to sleep in. So this was his very first time sleeping outside with no shelter, no anything. The cold bore down so aggressively that I feared my blood had frozen solid in my veins. We made a sandwich of our bodies to keep the guy in the middle warm and took turns switching to the middle position. In the morning, they warmed themselves in the sun. They looked towards the east, the direction they were headed, and the mountains looked never ending. We can't keep going east. We're only walking deeper into the mountains, said Roberto. This is hopeless. Think of the others, said Nando. Are we any good to them if we're dead? Then what should we do? They decided to return to the tail section and bring the batteries back to the wreckage. They hoped to make the radio work and potentially get help without having to risk climbing through the mountains. When they tried to move the batteries, they found them too heavy to carry, which makes sense. Like these are huge airplane batteries. They do not need to be transportable. Nev, you're like, or maybe they should be.
Wish they were.
Well, for this situation, for sure.
Yeah,
They
you're
risked
right.
They rested 2 more nights in the tail, and on November 21st, they climbed back to the wreckage. The fuselage was a steep slope, and they were forced to rest every few steps, and their progress was slow. So, like up to this point, they were climbing downhill, so they had to climb back uphill to get back to the wreckage. They reached the crash site by mid-afternoon. It had been 6 days since they had left, and the hope that the trio had reached civilization was gone with their return. Because they were supposed to go get help, and now these guys show back up. So that means obviously you're not getting any help. Roberto told them his plan was to fix the radio, and while they agreed to try, Nando saw that their hope, like as a collective, was dwindling. 2 attempts to climb the mountain had failed, and every attempt seemed doomed to disaster. They worked on the radio, some of which had was firmly anchored and difficult to get. When Nando suggested that maybe the radio was broken and wouldn't be worth the effort to transport, Roberto flashed in anger. Roberto was putting all his hopes into the radio, that they would work and that they wouldn't have to risk themselves to the mountain again. And after much convincing from Roberto, they worked on the radio, and in a few days, they progressed down the slope to reach the tail. So originally, they were going to take the batteries, right? And the batteries were too heavy to move. So they were like, okay, the plan is to take the radio from like the main wreckage and take it down to the tail and then see if it'll work, if they can connect it. So they get down there and they worked really hard to connect the radio to the battery and try to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And so they brought back Roy. Remember the guy that fixed the
Oh
the
boy,
first
Roy.
radio, our friend Roy from earlier. So Roy didn't want to go. Roy was tired and he was like, I do not know how to fix this radio, Roberto. And Roberto was like, you're going.
You did it
And so
once, bro.
you fixed that one radio that one time with that aluminum thing. Now you have to go. So they left Roberto and Roy to work on the tail, and Nando and Tintin went back to go get more food. Meanwhile, those back at the wreckage were weakening. They were running out of food and had lost most of the bodies during the avalanche. So they had gone down from having like all of these 20 bodies to just like the people had died during the avalanche. So Tintin and Nando dug for 2 days in search of the bodies that they had lost because that meant more food. They went back to the tail to find that Roy and Roberto were still working on the radio. And then suddenly they heard that the Uruguayan Air Force was sending a specially equipped plane to search for them. Nando
So it
felt
Not a
is.
hope.
Wait, so it is searching for him now?
it is searching for them now.
Hallelujah.
Did they ever say what changed, like from why they went to the we're no longer to,
I think
now
it
we're
was the
having a
Chilean
special.
Air Force, and
Oh,
Uruguay was the one that said they were going to search for them.
I see.
Nando felt that the only way to survive was to travel west. He didn't have much hope in the rescue attempts. After all, Gustavo said that the slopes, like from the slopes, you couldn't tell the Fairchild, so the plane, from the snow, and it would
Mm-hmm.
be impossible for a plane to see them. They had traveled east without a solution, and now the only option was to travel up the slope and head west. So this is what Nando thinks. This is what
Theory
the way
is.
his brain is thinking. Yeah. They left the tail section of the plane and worked on going up the slope back towards the wreckage. Suddenly, they were swept up in a sudden blizzard. In seconds, everything was chaos. The wind shoved and tugged them in every direction. They lost each other and their sense of direction. Roy had fallen, and when Nando tried to move him, he refused. Move your ass. This storm is going to kill us. But Roy refused. They were trapped in complete white. He couldn't see anything. Couldn't, like, you don't know where you are, you don't know where your friends are, and it's just you in white. Nando knew he had to keep going, but Roy wouldn't move. I have to leave him or I'll die, thought Nando, so he staggered against the winds and left Roy behind. We were all being forced towards our limits, but Roy had been pushed too hard and too fast. He had found the place where death would take him at last. But suddenly, Nando was so mad. because Roy was showing him his future of sitting down and just dying and finding the place where you just let go.
No.
And in this future, he lay down and let the snow take him. So he crashed down the slope to where Roy had fallen and kicked him and yelled at him. And although Roy wept and cried, he finally got up. And Nando forced him to stumble up the slope 1 foot at a time. After a few hundred feet, he slumped and fell. He had used all his strength. And Nando grabbed Roy from the waist and lifted him from the ground. He dragged him until he could see the plane. And when Nando saw that plane, he gave him a boost of energy, and they made it all the way up the wreckage and back into the plane. When I read that, I was like, he's just gonna let him die. He's just gonna let the snow take him.
Did
That's
he give up
wild.
fully? He did let the snow take him?
No,
No.
Nando went to pick
No.
him up and
No.
dragged
Okay.
him.
Okay.
But
Okay. Good.
like honestly, Nando's a real one for doing that. You know, like sometimes you can force is
You gotta be forced to give a fuck.
right, you know, like that real fight, that real hard fight for survival.
I mean, and I don't like at this point, they had been on this mountainside for at least a month and a half. It's
Mm.
November. Yeah, it's still October, I think. Imagine I could, no, it's November now. So at least almost 2 months of you just being on the mountain.
Hmm.
That messes with your psyche. So,
Oh
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh, destroys you, I'm sure. Those days away from the Fairchild had given Nando the perspective to see how gruesome their everyday had become. There were piles of bones and body parts all over the wreckage. Strips of fat were spread on the roof to dry in the sun. There were human skulls in the bone pile, and someone's leg was being stored near the fuselage for easy access. Just a leg, just like from your hip to your toes, just out there, just a leg. As time had passed, the food supply had diminished, so they started to eat the meat, then the organs, eventually eating the brains inside the skulls. They ate everything. They did not. The bodies of Nando's sister and mother still hadn't been touched, though. The mountains had stolen much from them, and they had faced intolerable horrors. And although their bodies were weakening, their humanity had survived, and so they didn't eat the family. And that is where we're ending our story for today. What did you guys think?
It's a roller coaster, honestly. Like it,
oh, sorry. I
Okay.
feel hopeful.
yeah, like I feel hopeful, but like it's so like, oh, like this happens and it's depressing. And then like something comes to light and it's a little bit, you know, it's like, oh, it's better or whatever. And then it's back down. And it's really hard to, I feel like for me to digest this what's going on because there is so much back and forth. It's almost like they're being like puppeted, right? Like they're like, you know what I mean? Or like not being puppeted, but like, uh,
Like pulled back and forth.
yes, pulled back and forth of being like, you know, oh, like here's
Oh,
death. And then,
eh,
oh, no, 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 not yet. You know what I mean? Like, and it's
JK.
so cat and mouse almost. Like it's so, I don't want to say thrilling, but it's really hard to digest, I guess. That's the best way for me to put it. Because
You're like,
like
I'm so
a part,
stressed.
yeah, like it really is. Like it makes me anxious because I don't know if the next thing I'm gonna hear is positive or negative, you know?
Well, if it makes you feel better, like we know Nando makes it out of this because he is alive to tell the story and write the book.
Hmm.
That is reassuring. But also, yes, can they please catch a break? I'm telling you, remember I sent you that Snapchat and I was like, I want them to catch a break and they will not.
Yeah.
The world just keeps hitting them hard. The mountain wants to kill them.
No, seriously, the mountain is unforgiving.
Hmm. That's how snow is, though. I mean, that's how nature is.
Nature. She'll catch
Nature,
you.
she gets you.
That is so, yeah, that's
Nonsense.
heavy on the heart. That is heavy on the heart, man.
I know, no.
I can't even make any like silly little quims about it either. I'm like, man, that's just
I
fuck.
can't. This one is a lot more serious. Yeah. It's very
Yeah,
Wait, so they ate that guy's wife?
I think they
But
did.
But
I
they're
don't
like
Oh.
not Nando's mom, not Nando's sister. That's a
I don't know if they ate the wife because like he was still there. But
Yeah.
it's his perspective, so I don't know if they did or if they didn't. I'm not, I'm gonna hope that they didn't because I think that because I think Javier lived. He didn't die because he was crying that night. So like
I'm sure he
I
wouldn't have let
I'm
them.
sure they didn't. I mean, I wouldn't let y'all eat Evan.
Yeah, like
And
They're
that's
mine.
fine. We'll wait. Yeah, exactly. I'm fine with that.
When I die, you can eat me. That's fine. I can't watch you eat. Like after I die, eat whoever you want, but I can't watch you
Yeah,
eat
no,
the people I
obviously.
love, like
That's
love
another
biblically.
that's like another psychological warfare, I feel like. I'm like,
Yes, it's so fucked. It's terrible. Anyway, so that's
I
our
was just curious.
traumatic tale for the day. Yeah, I don't know if they did or they didn't. I'm gonna assume they didn't. I feel like if they wouldn't
I
eat
hope
Nando's
not.
sister, they wouldn't
I
eat.
hope not.
Yeah. Um, but we will be putting out our next installment in 2 weeks. Keep a lookout. And that one will be our final one for this series, but it is going to be a really good one. I know because I wrote it.
It has a happy ending, please.
We will all cry together, but it is a happy ending. But we will
Good.
cry.
Oh, I love
Oh,
crying.
okay.
Yeah, we'll cry
Favorite
together.
pastime.
This is an open emotion place.
Better
As
here than the Starbucks.
I did not cry at Starbucks. Success. As always, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Sippin' Saga Society. If you have histories, mysteries, or just worries, stories worth telling, feel free to DM us on Instagram or Facebook at sippinsaga dot underscore wait, not dot sippinsaga underscore society, or visit our website at sippinsaga.com. Bye.
Bye.